welcome to another podcast. My name is Jimmy Rex, your local Utah expert. I'm here today with a good friend of mine, Sean O'Connell. Sean is one of my favorite people in all of Utah, and Sean's got a very interesting story. This is a podcast I was super excited to be able to get Sean on. Rather than do a big intro, Sean, I'm going to have you tell us a little bit about yourself. But Sean, basically, he was born and raised, I think, in Minnesota or Wisconsin? Minnesota, okay. And then you came to high school here, Jordan High School.
Right, Jordan High kid.
Played football at Weber and at Utah.
Yeah.
You were part of the 2004 Fiesta Bowl team.
I was, yes. I was the least important part of that team, but I was on it.
Hey, he was on it. That's more we can say for everyone, but about 90 other people. So, no, that's when I first kind of got introduced to you a little bit. And then I know you got into UFC fighting, well, MMA fighting.
MMA, right.
And then you worked your way up to the UFC.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about that. First, I want to talk about that 2004 Fiesta Bowl team. That was, you played for Utah for 1 year or 2 years?
I was just there for the Fiesta Bowl year. It was the only year I was there.
Pretty good year.
It was a good year to be there.
And what was it like? What was it like being coached by Urban Meyer? Just like his intensity.
So, I tell people this all the time, that Urban Meyer is the coach that every cliche describes. He's the guy that somehow you will run through a wall for him, even if you're the lowliest scout team guy on the roster, which is where I was, right? There was a bunch of us that, you know, he told us to stay the bleep out of the way. That's literally what he said to us in the first team meeting. He said, all you guys that aren't going to play for me this year, stay the bleep out of the way. But you don't want to do that. You want to earn his trust, his attention, and you want to be Rudy. So he got the most out of every single person. And the system that he employed, at least at the University of Utah, everybody knew their job and everybody did their job, because if you didn't, the cost was so high. I mean, you were going to be running until you puked. You were going to be kicked out of practices.
He had those consequences in place.
The consequences were in place, and I don't know if he carried that to him, you know, with Florida and all that kind of stuff. But at Utah, everyone knew their job and everyone did their job. Whether you were the team captain, whether you were Alex Smith, or you were, you know, me, you did your job, or you were going to hurt.
Well, let me ask you this, because you also then coached under Kyle Whittingham.
Right.
He was there as well. So describe that a little bit. I mean, obviously you had Dan Mullen there. You had a couple of the great coaches, right? That's at Mississippi State now. But specifically, I think Utah fans will be interested to hear, like, how was Kyle in comparison to Urban as far as how he coached and things like that?
Well, I was there for the transition when Urban left and Kyle Whittingham took over as head coach. And actually, I was one of the players that went to Kyle's house and asked him not to take the BYU job.
You son of a... No.
Because he had both offers on the table, right?
He did,
So that transition was really interesting, because he went from being kind of the player favorite defensive coordinator to now the guy who's in charge of everything, and it all falls on his plate. So I think he got a lot more tense. He was a lot harder to deal with from a player.
So he wasn't like that before, because he does seem like a coach that'd be a little bit tough to approach.
I mean, he was
just super intense. Like, I don't like my coaches being that intense.
Yeah.
It works for some guys, but like it just seems like he'd be harder to approach.
He was always very intense and demanded, you know, the same kind of things Urban did. Do your job. There's a lot of accountability with Kyle, but when he took over as head coach, I think nobody ever talks about this, and I hope he doesn't get mad at me for talking about it, but I don't think he knew what kind of head coach he wanted to be yet.
Okay, yeah, fair.
Because I think he had the influence of his own father and of Ron McBride and every other coach that he worked for, and then the most recent...
Well, including he played for Lavelle. And,
and then the incredibly successful run, just that 2-year run under Urban Meyer.
Sure.
That you don't want to scrap that system.
Sure.
Right? So I think he was trying to mold all those styles together and make them his own. And I promise you this, in 2005, he didn't do it successfully. I don't think in 2006 he did it successfully. But then he started to figure out 07, 08, and he got, I think, the best mix of the way he was brought up in coaching, the more recent things he had learned from Urban Meyer, and obviously in 08 is when Utah had its most successful season.
Sure.
So,
no, that's great. That's great insight. And then you actually became the voice of, you did the pre and post game for Utah. For how many years did you do that after you played?
Just for 4 years.
4 years. Yeah. And then you also you were kind of the driving home from work sports radio guy, right?
Yeah.
And you worked along with, let's see, Hans and...
I did. My first radio job was in the mornings with Hans Olsen. I was Bill Riley's co-host for a while, then we split, and I did my own show. And then after that, it was myself and Brian Swinney. Tom Hackett was my most recent co-host.
Okay. So is it hard to come up with material every single day to talk about, or what drove your show mostly when you were doing that?
Well, in Utah, in this market here in Salt Lake, and people probably already know this, but the Jazz are pretty universal. Everyone loves the Jazz, right? Or hates them, but they want to hear about it. And then Utah and BYU are the driving brands. More Utah than Salt Lake than BYU, obviously. And then everything else in the NFL after that, and baseball, nobody cares. So baseball season in that dog days of summer, that's the only time it's hard to come up with material. You're a sports fan.
That makes sense. I'm a sports guy. Yeah, I'm a baseball guy, so
yeah,
I love it. But even I don't want to watch baseball till September.
Yeah, like regular season July baseball games.
Yeah, I'll just check the highlights.
It's fun to go sit at the ballpark.
Correct.
But there's, you got 162 games. It's not that big of a deal if your team loses one.
So what was like, as far as your favorite part of doing the show every day, what was your favorite thing about being that voice for a university that was on the rise, kind of?
I think that the most fun was just watching it all happen and getting a chance to see guys that, like, I played with Morgan Scally, right? Mm-hmm. Morgan ended up as the defensive coordinator during the time I was doing radio. So kind of watching his whole career cycle get to the point, I mean, he's going to be head coach someday, but being part of that and just being able to talk to him about the journey and getting to know some of the other coaches that I didn't get a chance to play for or play with, that was fun. You're a people person like I am. It's all about your relationships and who you know and who you're talking to. And that job made me very blessed and fortunate to be able to talk to important, interesting guys.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I have a lot of, I run more in BYU circles than Utah circles, but it's pretty close to 50-50. Yeah. And like guys like you and I, we've been friends for 7-8 years. I think we hang out all the time. And when me and you were talking sports, if it's BYU Utah, it couldn't be more fun or more friendly. But when we get, you get to the stadium, sometimes people think you have to, like, BYU fans hate Utah fans or anything else. I remember the game, not this year, the year before at Utah, I was sitting in the front row behind the Utah bench.
Yes.
And all the fans around me are just piling on the church jokes, the whole thing, And you come up, you're in your Utah.
I was standing on the sideline.
Yeah, and me and you were high-fiving and talking for 15 minutes, and the fans were literally mad at you. They're like, why are you friends with this guy that's a BYU fan? It's just funny to me that different perspective that you get when you're, and you're as involved as you are too. I think it's a lot less emotional as far as like the outcome is more you just enjoy being a part of it. It's just what you're doing. So
yeah, it's interesting because I mean the rivalries in whether it's Notre Dame, USC, BYU, Utah, whatever. I think that's what makes sports great, right?
For sure.
So the competition and even a little vitriol in competition, I think, is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it belongs on the field or the court or whatever. And most athletes, you see them as soon as the game's over. What happens, right?
Yeah.
Helmets come off, they're all hugging, and that's how fans should treat it too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, when I was roommates with a couple of the BYU football players, one year Utah beat BYU down in Provo. It was the last time they beat us in Provo before this year.
Yeah.
And I remember a bunch of the cheerleaders came over after, the Utah cheerleaders, and that's who we hung out with all night. It's just funny to me because it's like if BYU fans knew that like the players were hanging out with the Utah cheerleaders, they probably would have been all over Twitter like screaming and stuff.
And vice versa, right?
Yeah,
if
exactly.
The Utah fans knew their cheerleaders
you're hanging out with the BYU
a bunch
players.
of zoobs down there. Oh dear.
Exactly. No, it's good stuff. Well, so you kind of had to balance, you're doing the radio and then you started UFC. What got you into that? Did you fight a lot as a kid? Did you get in a lot of fights in high school? Or
not a lot. I mean, I guess I've always been kind of a square. I never really, got in trouble with being wild, partying and stuff like that. Drugs and drinking are not my thing. I've never even touched the stuff. But if I was going to get in trouble, it would be because of a fight.
Sure.
And, my football
Which, by the
career,
way, I'll take 10 kids like that, right?
Yeah,
they don't have to worry about serious trouble.
Yeah. It's just, the neighbors are going to come over and be like, your kid hit my kid, that kind of stuff. But, my football career my college football career ended up being pretty unsatisfying to me.
Okay.
Because, you come out of high school and you think you're awesome. And then you get into college and you realize, I'm not that awesome. And I probably should have gone to a smaller school like Weber State from the get-go instead of bouncing around and, transferring after the fact. And then I probably would have had a little bit more fun, played more, etc. But by the time I was done playing football, I was, 22 years old with this competitive drive that had not been satisfied by my football career because I was on the bench too much.
Sure.
And I'd always been a little bit of a fighter. I had a high school wrestling background. I'd been watching the sport for a long time of mixed martial arts, and that was around the same time the Ultimate Fighter. You know the Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah. It was Johnny Ritchie did the show on
There was
the WB or whatever.
So the sport was growing really rapidly from a broadcasting perspective and from an exposure perspective, and I was part of the audience that really grabbed onto it. And I thought, I'm a decently tough guy, pretty strong. I think I can beat up a lot of people. I might as well go see. And locally, we had, the opportunity to. All you had to do was call a promoter.
So you just called and
you just called Johnny Ritchie.
That was your first fight. You just called him up. And you're like, I want to fight somebody.
It legitimately went like this. Hey, I want to fight. Okay, we got an opening 2 Saturdays from now. How big are you?
Wow.
6'1", 240.
Somebody could have been killed.
Yeah, I'm 6'1", 240. Okay, did you wrestle in high school? Yes. You ever had any Muay Thai or boxing? No. What have you been doing the last 5 years? I was playing college football. Oh, okay. So you're probably pretty athletic.
Okay, yeah.
So we're gonna match you up with someone who's 1-1. Is that okay with you? And I went and I knocked him out in 30 seconds, and that was it.
I love it. And then so how many fights did you do? So did you start immediately doing hire a big trainer, or at what point were you like, I got something here, I should actually take this serious?
Yeah, it took me about 6-7 fights. So my first 3 fights I won easily, and then I lost one on kind of a weird fluke of bad officiating. Fighters always have excuses for our losses, by the way, including myself. Yeah.
Never lost a fight.
Yeah, never lost a fight, for real. Wink, wink. So I won 3, lost 1, won my next 3, and then it was the end of my first year of fighting, and they were like, okay, we want you to fight for the heavyweight belt here in Utah. I was like, okay. And I had realized I need to be training with better guys because I was just hanging out with my buddies. We'd go wrestle at the gym and hit the bags, and half the time we were training at Sugar House Park in the grass.
Like Rocky style.
Yeah,
just
running up the hills.
Stairs
it was just, it was super old school, but not adequate if you wanted to be a high-level competitor.
Sure.
And locally, we had Jeremy Horn,
Yep.
who's a UFC legend and an MMA legend. And so I had kind of identified about halfway through the year, I want to go train with them, but it's not cheap, and I was broke.
Okay.
I'd just come out of college, and I was young and not making a lot of money, and I was like, I don't know if I can pay for that membership. Long story short, I win the heavyweight belt. A very generous friend of mine who owned a business said, I'm going to sponsor your first year of training at Horns,
Cool.
at Elite Performance, and then we're going to see what happens from there. And obviously, I showed up at that gym, learned what MMA was really about because I got beat up by people half my size.
How little did you actually know when you joined that gym?
Well, I thought I knew a lot.
Right, I know you thought.
Because I was 6-1, and I was the heavyweight champion of the state of Utah, right? But my first day in the gym, I'm not exaggerating, my first day in the gym, a 145-pound guy choked me out.
Wow.
And it's because he knew what he was doing,
Sure.
and I was just strong, right?
Yeah.
So it was
You had a good punch.
it was a very humbling process, but it started me on a path to getting much better very quickly.
Skip ahead. You how long were you doing it before you got hired by the actual UFC? I mean,
Right.
the main major leagues of MMA fighting. How long did that take, that process in between?
Let's see, my first fight was in 2007, and my UFC debut was in 2014.
2014.
So it was a good 7 years.
Yeah.
6.5, 7 years before I finally got called up to the big show, and it was,
Where was that fight at? Where did that take place?
The first one was in Quebec City, Canada.
Okay.
And I got knocked out cold in my first fight. And that's, you feel like, oh my gosh, I've arrived, I finally made it. It's a goal you have as a fighter for a long time. And I was fighting a guy I actually knew.
Oh, okay.
A friend of mine, cool guy, I knew how dangerous he was. But in local fights, and you've watched a lot of local fights, you watched some of my fights more on the local scene.
Yep.
In those fights, if you make a mistake,
You can get away with that.
you might get hurt, you might get a black eye, but more often than not, you can get away with it just by being tough or slightly more skilled than the guy. But I made a big mistake, and that was the end.
That was the end.
I got knocked out.
I kind of tell people that's the difference. Like baseball's a good example, right? The AAA or AA versus the majors. And AAA, AA, you can get away with bad pitches, but in the majors, you literally can't miss a pitch.
Yeah.
If you miss one pitch, it's a home run, every time. And
It's
so-
a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it exists that way probably at the highest level of every sport. I never played in the NFL,
Right.
but you see guys.
those windows they have to hit, like as a quarterback,
Exactly.
or all those different things.
So yeah, I found out, I've learned a lot of lessons along the way in my MMA career, but that one, that one was pretty stark because it was like, you can't be over aggressive in a UFC fight because this guy is big enough and strong enough and fast enough to land one punch and shut your brain off.
So after that fight, because a lot of times with UFC, I mean, if you get knocked out in your fight, you might not ever get another chance, right? And one thing about you that I love is you kind of have this personality. You did a very good job of marketing yourself within the UFC. One, your fighting style, you're a brawler. And two, you always were doing funny stuff like in your weigh-ins and things like that. Did you do that on purpose to try to stay relevant, I guess, in UFC, or is that just kind of who you are?
It's just kind of who I am, and it ended up being more of an organic thing. I was actually really fortunate that the guy I fought in that first bout, rest in peace, by the way, Ryan Jimmo, he's no longer with us, wow. But he and I knew each other, so we were backstage at the weigh-ins, and I had always kind of goofed off at the weigh-ins, like flirting with ring girls and stuff on the local shows.
This is not shocking.
But but I had never done like a choreographed or premeditated anything at weigh-ins. But he and I they herd you like cattle into the back, and you have to stand next to your opponent in backstage waiting for them to call you to go step on the scale in your underwear in front of everybody, right? It's kind of a weird deal. But since he and I knew each other and were friendly, he was like, should we do something crazy? Should we like throw punches at each other and make it seem like a big thing? I said, no, everyone does that. It's stupid. And he's like, well, let's do something funny. And we came up with the little wedding toast.
With the protein shakes.
Link arms and whatever. And it was a hit, and everyone loved it. And we had a good laugh about it. And I was like, that fits with my personality. So every time I weigh in, I'm going to do something funny. And that, unfortunately, I became known for that more than I became from, being a formidable fighter.
Well, it's funny. I saw in like one of my buddies like, dude, you got to check out this UFC fighter. He's hilarious, and it was like a montage of all your funny weigh-ins and things. I'm like, oh, that's my buddy Sean. Yeah, that's my guy.
Yeah, it's funny. I get it still goes viral on social media.
For sure.
So every 3-4 months, it'll pop up on all my feeds. And it'll go like. In Brazil, it'll pop up for the first time, or my Instagram's right now flooded with Russian people because it went viral in Russia for the first time. So I'm getting a bunch of messages in Coptic alphabet.
That's fine. No, it's great. It's great. Well, and so what? I guess people that are kind of thinking like, UFC might be something I want to get. I know a lot of parents and adults are nervous about letting people fight in it. Like, what advice do you have both for letting people let their children get into fighting? Because I think it's a huge advantage to give your kids the confidence to be able to fight. I've taken a lot of Krav Maga training and things like that, and it just gives you a different confidence to walk around in the way that you are. But what advice do you have for both kids wanting to get into it and then for parents that maybe don't want their kids getting into that?
Well, depending on how old your kid is, I think, and I don't have kids myself, so I don't know what it's like to watch your own flesh and blood get beat up, but if your kids are young, get them into wrestling, get them into jiu-jitsu, get them into karate, get them into the martial arts that are not about necessarily combat.
Take concussions or anything.
Exactly,
like that.
And they don't have to walk into a gym and get the crap beat out of you to decide whether you like martial arts or not. If you have your 6-year-old in wrestling, he or she is going to be on better footing moving forward in every sport and in every martial art, right?
Sure.
And if you've got a teenager, 12, 13, 14 years old, who's probably watching the UFC and saying, I want to try that, that looks fun, it's a lot of fun. But they will decide for you. If you're a parent, your kid will decide for you whether they not want to continue or not. Get them the free week membership that every MMA gym offers.
That's good.
Let the kid go in there, and
it's either for you or it's not.
And they're going to find out, is this something I like? Can I stand getting punched in the face? Do I want to improve on that, or do I want to run away from it? And it's not for everybody.
Let's say somebody in your position, like when you started, 19, 22 years old, maybe just got done playing high school or college football. Realistically, how tough was the road? Was it tougher than you thought it was going to be? Did it take, if somebody wants to go that route, would you recommend that they try that? If you just say they got some experience fighting or whatever.
Yeah, I would say earlier is better, right? Because the sport is trending now where guys like me will never make it all the way to the big show.
Sure.
Guys who start when they're training in their 20s probably aren't going to make it to the big show 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole crop of kids who've been training since they were 12 and now they're 25, so they have 13 years of experience. But I do recommend for anybody, I don't care how old you are, whether you're 19 or you're 40, if it's something you're interested in, go to a gym, learn a martial art.
Sure.
Maybe you don't like getting punched in the face, just do jujitsu, or just do wrestling or something, or judo. But you've taken some martial arts,
Yeah.
and you don't need it in your profession, right?
No. I enjoy the challenge. I remember my favorite training I ever did, I had to put my hands behind my back, and for about 90 seconds straight, the trainer was just punching at my face with either right or left, and I just had to dodge it.
Yeah.
And I must have got punched 20 times, but it was an exercise to learn to see the punch coming and not, you flinch naturally.
Yeah.
And you try to get that flinch out of you, right?
Exactly.
And so stuff like that, it was just kind of cool. Like normally in a fight, you're just kind of tucking in and going in.
Yeah, you don't need it for your profession. You don't really need it in your social life. You're a very friendly, non-confrontational person. It's not like you're walking around getting in fights all the time.
Haven't been in a fight in a long time.
Right? So there's no practical reason why Jimmy Rex needs martial arts, but it's good for you because of the fitness, because of the flexibility, because of the confidence that it gives you.
Well, I think it gives you knowing that. Here's what I love about martial arts, and you know this 100 times more than I do, but just knowing that you have that ability to hold your own in a fight or whatever else, right? You walk around with a confidence that if somebody's looking to pick a fight with you, they're going to recognize, they're going to feel that energy coming from you that's not afraid or that's not worried about it, and they're going to pick somebody else to fight.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, it's like carrying, right? Just in case, it's nice to have the skill, but it's not something that, if you should be doing it to get out of fights as opposed to trying to get in.
And that's exactly how I treat it.
So have you ever been in a street fight?
I've been in plenty of them.
Since you've been a UFC
Since
fighter?
I was since I've been a professional fighter, no. And
can you imagine some idiot just picks a fight with you?
well, that's the thing. I mean, I am not the scariest looking dude in a room.
No.
Right? I mean, especially you and I, when we're hanging out, there's usually a couple NFL players around. There's maybe a couple college football players, former college football players.
Right.
I'm never the biggest guy in the room. I'm not the scariest looking guy in the room. But I'm not the kind of guy you want to pick a fight with.
Right.
And I know when I walk into a room,
you don't know which
I
guy's
can't
trained.
visually identify most of the time, unless he's got crazy cauliflower ears, which guy I should be scared of, right? And you never know which guy's carrying.
Yep.
So, if anything, being a professional martial artist has taught me that you don't want to fight anybody unless it's for money.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, and the last thing, we'll get you out of here, but I want to know that experience, because you performed in front of, how many was the most people you fought in front of? I mean, you fought in front of some big crowds.
Yeah, I think the biggest one was 19,000, like basketball arena size.
What was that like? I mean, you're fighting, you're the main attraction to this group of 19,000 people. What was that like?
It was great, and it was really interesting because probably the most exciting fan experience or fighter experience in front of fans I had was I was fighting on a Conor McGregor undercard.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Was that the one at Madison Square Garden?
It was at TD Garden in Boston.
Okay, in Boston. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm in Boston. There's 8,000 people who've flown over from Ireland to watch this event. My last name is O'Connell, so they immediately love me because I'm
just
Irish
attached
last
to you.
name.
Yeah.
And it was a back and forth fight. I got beat up pretty good in the first round. Started to come back in the second round. Knocked the guy out in the third round, and you just feel like the coolest thing on earth.
Yeah.
Because there's however many thousands of people screaming because you just did something cool, and you walk around afterwards and you're black eyes and they're just offering to buy you beers, which I had to politely refuse. But it's such a weird thing, but people love achievement, whether it's athletic or business or whatever. They like to root for the success of others.
Sure, people want to be a part of it.
And to have that directed at you for 5 minutes is pretty intoxicating, honestly.
I bet.
It's pretty addicting. And so even now that I'm contemplating retirement, I'm like, well, but then I'll never feel that again.
Yeah.
So I should probably get
So
back
what
in.
is the next step for you? I mean, obviously you can't fight forever. You're getting kind of towards that part of your career where you try to figure out what you're doing. What's next for Sean O'Connell?
Testing the market, honestly, seeing what's out there. My UFC contract is finished, so now it's seeing if a Japanese organization or a Russian organization or whatever wants to pay me the kind of money it would take to motivate me to train again and go through all that stuff. And also probably a drop in weight, going down a weight class, just to kind of...
What weight class did you fight?
205, light heavyweight.
Jeez, that's what I weigh.
Yeah, so it's like, some of the scariest dudes on earth are like John Jones is a light heavyweight.
Wow, okay.
And You know, he's 6'5".
Yeah.
So, yeah, probably dropping down to 185 just because, first of all, I'll finally get a six-pack back if I do that. And also just for the longevity of not having to fight these huge animal dudes.
Sure. That are sucking down at 205.
Exactly. That walk at 240 plus and they're sucking down to 205 and are 6'4" and stuff. I'll probably do a couple test cuts and see if I can get down to 185 comfortably.
Cool.
But yeah, man, I'll keep you posted.
I love it. Well, thank you, Sean. This is, again, one of the, if you haven't watched it, go on YouTube, just search Sean O'Connell, UFC. His fights are by far the funnest ones to watch because he's a brawler.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, when I was in junior high, we started renting UFC 1 and 2 and 3, and the funnest fights were, back then it was, there was a tournament, so they'd have like 16 guys, and then they'd have the championship, and the funnest guys to watch were always the brawlers. Those, you know, I didn't enjoy Hoist Gracie and Ken Shamrock. I enjoyed the guys that were just swinging. That's how you fight.
Honestly, I need to be able to turn back the clock and go fight in those days.
Yeah,
because now everyone's too skilled. Everyone's too good.
Right.
Everyone's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I'm just the guy who can take a punch and give a punch, and that's. I need the UFC to
But
go
you've
back
won.
to
I mean,
that.
every single time you're fighting, the entire crowd is on their feet. They're yelling, they're screaming, and you've won. I mean, you've won. What do you call it?
The three fight of the night bonuses.
Fight of the night. Yeah, you won fight of the night every time you get on the card, pretty much. So it's. Do yourselves a favor, go check it out. Sean, we appreciate you, man. We've fun to follow you from here, and anything we can do, let us know. And I appreciate your friendship.
Check it out on MMA on Sirius XM, channel 93 on your Sirius XM dial. I'm doing Wednesday night shows and post-fight shows after all the pay-per-view cards. So tune in.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you, man.
Cool.
Take care.
Thanks.